The battle over Maryland's congressional map is now up to the state's voters. Governor Wes Moore is set to sign the redistricting measure today after it passed in Annapolis yesterday.
It was a party line vote. Democrats for, Republicans against. The GOP blasted the vote as a blatant power grab. Democrats said they are just responding to President Trump's push for new maps in red states. If voters approve the amendment in November, Maryland could see new districts in time for the 2028 presidential election. Governor Wes Moore was hoping to see this done in time for the midterm elections this fall.
But better late than never, he praised yesterday's outcome. A statement reads, "Inaction is not an option. Maryland will not be caught flat-footed while Republicans engage in political redlining that guts decades of progress that the generations before us fought for."
Joining us now to break down what this means for Maryland voters is author and redistricting expert Josh Rultenberg. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Simone. Thanks for having me.
Okay, let's start with some basics here. So can you help us explain what lawmakers actually approved? What would the constitutional amendment essentially do?
Yeah, so first it's important to point out what they didn't approve, which is new maps. That is going to be up to voters come November, whether or not the congressional map can be redrawn. But ultimately, what the lawmakers did yesterday was give voters the chance to answer that question come November. Now, the question is going to be, will ultimately voters decide to do that? Obviously, we're going to have to wait for November to see if indeed they're going to do that. But just keep in mind, what they're asking now is to change the rules of how the state redistricts. And the real question you have to ask if you're watching this at home is, why are these rules all of a sudden being brought up for change?
All right, so the question is, why are they doing this right now, especially in a special session?
Yeah, you just have to keep in mind that this isn't happening in a vacuum. While this is happening to Marylanders right now, and everything that's going to happen with this ballot initiative come November is going to affect their lives, this also is playing out on the national scene. Democrats are saying in Maryland that they're doing this as a result of what's happening in Republican-led states. As you just said, Republicans are saying that this is just a partisan power grab. But ultimately, what this is all about is the fact that come November, control of the House is up for grabs. And that means that every single district matters. And when you have one conservative-leaning district in Maryland, Democrats are going to try and grab that right now when they take into account the larger redistricting fight.
Well, let's speak directly to that, because again, a lot of discussion centering around Congressman Andy Harris. His district is a huge focus here, and quite frankly, potentially on the chopping block, so to speak. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, right now, you have more than 4 million registered voters in the state of Maryland, and nearly 25% of them are Republicans. And so when you have 8 congressional districts, that should mean, based on proportional representation, the way that voters actually vote, that Republicans should have a chance to win at least 2 of those districts. Right now, there are 8 districts and Democrats control 7 of them. So already that is out of balance based on proportional representation. And now that Democrats are trying to redraw this map to draw out the only remaining Republican, the question you have to ask yourself if you are a Republican voter right now is, if this map does change, what does that mean for my voice? What does that mean for my vote? And ultimately, we're going to get the answer to that question come November.
All right, so Maryland Democrats, they tried to redraw congressional maps before, but the courts have stopped them. So how does this amendment try to address that?
Yeah, so you had Maryland lawmakers, Maryland Democrats take that into account and realizing that they had to change their playbook. And so what they ultimately did was just give courts a new role in this process. And the fact that this is happening in the middle of the decade, again, you have to ask yourself, is this the right thing? And ultimately that will be up to voters. But this will allow, if this does go through, this will allow for the court, the Maryland Supreme Court, to rule on this directly and quickly, instead of the lower courts ultimately just having this and drawing out the process, it being delayed, and then ultimately going nowhere.
All right. Josh Rultenberg, author of Draw the Line in Ohio and redistricting expert. We certainly appreciate your time and helping us understand how this all comes together.
Thanks for having me.